Welcome to our lecture on where the major religions of the world originated and how those religions diffused. The slides are designed to accompany the textbook People, Places, and Culture. I'm, of course, Ms. Gall, and I'll be your host for the lecture. We've got a lot of content to cover and not a lot of time to do it, so stick with me for this roller coaster ride. So we're going to start out in South Asia and start with the oldest of our major religions, which is Hinduism, and it's over 4,000 years old. Originated in the Indus River Valley, which is in modern-day India, and I want to say Bangladesh or Pakistan, one side or the other of India, I should say. The Ganges is the most sacred river in Hinduism, and Hinduism is a polytheistic ethnic religion, so it's very locally based in India specifically, but throughout South Asia, and includes practices like ritual bathing and a belief in reincarnation. And that belief in reincarnation essentially holds as well with that idea of karma, which is to say that the actions you take in this life affect where you'll be in future lives, and that you keep going through this cycle until you perfect yourself, at which point then you'll get out of the cycle. But it can take thousands and thousands of lifetimes to do that. Also from the heart of South Asia, also incidentally got its start in India, although you don't find many of them there anymore, is Buddhism. And Buddhism splinters off from Hinduism about 2,500 years ago. It started by a guy named Siddhartha Gautama, who was an Indian prince, and essentially kind of his story is that he lives this very sheltered life, and then he finds out that there's suffering in the world. He goes out to try and find the reason for all suffering, and as a result of his journeys around and his various attempts at overcoming suffering, he develops this system of beliefs that we now call Buddhism. Buddhism is spread throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia, also into East Asia, and there's about 347 million adherents. Buddhism is, by the way, a universalizing religion, so they do go ahead and encourage people to convert. Shintoism is an ethnic religion that's based in Japan. It's focused a lot on nature and ancestor worship. It's also from Asia. If we're looking at the Huanghe River Valley, which is in China, then we get into things like Taoism and Confucianism. And Taoism, kind of the key guy is Lao Tzu, and he's the one who writes the Tao Te Ching. And that's kind of more or less the statement of beliefs. One of those key beliefs that they believe in is this idea of feng shui, which is to say that there's order to the universe and there are forces within the universe, and if you order your life in such a way, if you order it correctly, then you can channel those forces for good or for evil. Confucianism is not so much a religion as it is a philosophy, or basically a way of thinking and being, and it's based on the teachings of a guy named Kung Fu, I think is his name, but we anglicize it to Confucius. It's about 1,500 years old, give or take, and essentially it evolves through time. We develop this canon of Confucian classics that then becomes really the basis for Chinese philosophy, government, and the like. Moving on around the world, we're going to talk about the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, so now we're talking about really essentially the Middle East. And the oldest of the religions from the Eastern Mediterranean is Judaism, and Judaism is also an ethnic religion. It's based on the teachings of a guy named Abraham, and there are a number of different sects in Judaism, but the two most important are Orthodox and Reformed. And Orthodox is just kind of a way of saying those who cling to older belief systems, and Reformed are those who believe more that the religion is an evolving and growing thing, and that the beliefs need to adapt and the interpretations need to adapt to modern considerations. So Judaism gets its start in modern-day Israel, but under the Romans, what ends up happening is the Jews rebel against Roman rule, and the Romans forcibly move most of the Jews out of modern-day Israel. So because of that, that's how they get spread out throughout all of Europe. And they stay spread out really until World War II. And a little before World War II, we start to see this movement called Zionism. And Zionism is this movement to have an all-Jewish homeland in modern-day Israel. Okay, the ancient homeland of the Jews. But Zionism really gets its momentum, like hardcore gets its momentum in the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust. And as a result of this, what we see, actually these two things, is that while there are Jewish communities spread throughout the world, there are really two major Jewish communities. One is in Israel, the other one is in the United States. Okay? So, out of Judaism, we get Christianity, and Christianity is actually based on the teachings of a Jewish teacher, this guy named Jesus, and essentially he kind of wanders around and he converts people to thinking in some different ways about Judaism. As we go across time, what we see is the development of what today we would call the Roman Catholic Church, and then from that Roman Catholic Church, which is based in Italy, right in Rome, we get a split that leads to the Eastern Orthodox Church towards the end of the Roman Empire. And Eastern Orthodox, by the way, if you're Russian Orthodox or Ukrainian Orthodox, and so forth down the line, from Eastern Europe, that's Eastern Orthodox. Okay? The Protestant Reformation challenges those fundamental Catholic teachings, but that doesn't come until later, really until about the roughly late 1300s, early 1400s. And then Protestants get their name because they were protesting against the Catholic Church. And so there's a ton of different Protestant denominations these days, but just know that it really gets its start as protesting against what they see as the need to reform the Catholic Church. Christianity itself, so it starts out in the Eastern Mediterranean, diffuses throughout the Roman Empire, and stays in those formerly Roman territories by and large, really until about the 16th century, so the 1500s. And as Europeans colonize the world, they also seek to spread Christianity. And the famous slogan that kind of goes along with this is this idea of God, gold, and glory. And that's to say the colonists, and in particular the explorers, for sure, really had three goals. One, they wanted to spread the word of God. Okay, so this spread Christianity. Two, they wanted to become wealthy. Right, and again, this is mostly the explorers. Colonists have slightly different views. And then glory, because the explorers in particular wanted fame back home. Okay, colonists, on the other hand, are moving over. They're settling, they're living in these areas. And as they're doing that, they're attempting to convert people. So like I said, there's a ton of different Protestant denominations in particular. There's about 33,000 different Christian denominations, the bulk of which are some form of Protestant. Next religion, Islam. And Islam actually is a break off from also both Judaism and Christianity and incorporates some of the same belief systems. It's founded by a guy named Muhammad in about the year 620. The sacred text for Islam is the Quran, and there's kind of 5 key pillars, or we call them the 5 pillars, but really it's the 5 important beliefs of Islam, of which really the most important one for our class you need to know is the Hajj, which is to say the pilgrimage to Mecca. There's a whole month dedicated to making these pilgrimages, and it is one of the sacred duties of a Muslim. If they are physically and economically capable, they are expected to make the pilgrimage at least once in their life. Another thing you might want to know about Islam in terms of geography and things like that, when Muslims pray, they pray facing the city of Mecca, and if they're not sure which way the city of Mecca is, then they pray to the east. Islam gets its start, by the way, in modern-day Saudi Arabia, and then spread outward from there through a series of conquests and wars until it covered really everywhere from most of North Africa through the modern Middle East into Southeast Asia. It was a huge empire at its height. There are 2 major divisions in Islam and a bunch of minor ones, and we don't really need to worry too much about the minor ones, but the big ones that you need to worry about are the Shiite and the Sunni. And Sunni comprise about 85% of Muslims, And the Shia, they're about 10%. And the other 5% of Muslims, that's those other smaller sects I told you didn't need to worry about. The Shia mostly live in modern-day Iran and Iraq. There's kind of they call it a Shia crescent right through there. And again, most of the rest of Muslims are Sunni. You don't need to know a ton about this, just know that that's the divisions, and that's where if I was going to look to find majority Shia populations, those are the countries I would look in. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about the diffusion of Islam, and in essence what we see is, especially initially, Islam is spread across the Arabian Peninsula by conquest. So the Arabian Peninsula at the time was a series of a bunch of tribes engaged in all kinds of tribal warfare and fighting for resources and things like that. And Muslims essentially conquer their way across the Arabian Peninsula and then start to conquer their way again across North Africa all the way into modern day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. Ultimately, Islam is spread by trade as well. And the Islamic trade empire at its height was just absolutely huge. It's got about 1.5 billion followers worldwide. Of our universalizing religions, really of any of our major religions, it is the fastest growing religion. So it's got the most people converting, being born into it, and the like. Last little bit to talk about, a little bit about indigenous religions and shamanist religions. And indigenous religions, these are ones that are local in scope. So they're very much localized. There's a reverence for nature. Okay. Again, this idea that inanimate objects have spirits and that we need to, and animate objects as well, and that we need to show appropriate respect for those items. And this information is really passed down through tribes. So there are tons and tons and tons of different indigenous religions, and each one is going to be different in terms of the specific natures of its beliefs. We talk about shamanism. Shamanism is also a community faith. It often also includes that reverence for nature, but more specifically, it's got a single religious teacher or a small group of religious teachers, and we call those shamans. And so you follow the practices and the teachings of the shaman. So this has been our lecture talking about major religions of the world, where they originated, how they diffused. We talked about Shintoism, we talked about Taoism, we talked about Confucianism, we talked about Hinduism, we talked about Buddhism, all of which come from Asia, okay? And most of which, by the way, are ethnic, except in scope, except for Buddhism, which is a universalizing religion and which did seek commerce. And we talked about coming out of the Middle East. We talked about Judaism, which is an ethnic religion, Christianity and Islam, which are universalizing religions, and talked a little bit about how those spread. Again, in particular, Christianity and Islam spreading largely through conquest and through trade. And then we ended up and we were talking about indigenous religions and shamanist religions, which are ethnic religions, and they're very localized in scope. They don't really spread. Okay, and this is a big key idea you got to know, is that ethnic religions, you find ethnic religions where you find people of that cultural group, right? So there aren't a bunch of white Hindus, for example. But it's not uncommon to find Hindu temples in areas that have Indian populations or Southeast Asian populations. Okay? So if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to bring them into class, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions you have.